You are listening to Influencers from the Conference Board.
Welcome to this episode of the podcast. Let's think outside the box. So often do we hear this sentence in corporate boardrooms and meeting rooms and so on. Let's think outside the box. And I was always wondering, what is it outside of these boxes that people think to find there? Now, today I want to challenge you to actually do the opposite, to think inside the box. Because I do believe we can find quite some gems when we really do think inside the box, and actually that can help us with our innovation, our change, our leadership in general. First, a quick introduction. My name is Lars Sudmann. I'm the Council Director for the Strategy and Transformation Council, as well as for a Business Unit CFO Council at the Conference Board, as well as an advisor on strategy and innovation. Think inside the box. Why should we think inside the box? I do believe there's a couple of boxes that we can use that can help us in our day-to-day process for leaders. What are these boxes? I want to share with you a couple of them. First of all, what you can do is time box things. What is time boxing? Well, you give a certain amount of time for any task. One example for this one are hackathons, which are quite popular in the product development community and the software development community. What is a hackathon? In a hackathon, you give a certain amount of time, a time box, basically, 1 day, 2 days to create something. The key idea is that after that time, you create it. And when I interviewed, for example, the person who runs, who was one of the co-founders of Hack Belgium, one of the greatest and biggest hackathons in Belgium, he said, the role of that time box, the role of that time pressure is to move things forward, to stop the discussion, to create something in reality. And that thinking inside that time box can help enormously in moving things forward. So time box is something that you as a leader can use. But there's also other boxes. One box that I call the process box. So you define a certain box on how certain things are approached. So for example, I love when innovation teams use debating structures as their process box. Rather than saying, let's discuss something here, they say, no, let's use a certain process box for this one. Let's use standard classical debate structures. One person takes forward and says, okay, for that new idea here, 2 minutes now, what speaks for it? What is the pro? The other person randomly selected, what speaks for 2 minutes now? What speaks against it? What is the con? And by using this and accepting this process box of the debate structures, it can be very powerful that it's not being discussed. It's not like, oh, there's the naysayers again. It's like everybody is forced to think about the pros, the cons, and so on. And it enables you to have a much deeper discussion. So that's a process box. There's also a ritual box that you can think inside it. And my favorite example for this one are rituals like at Toyota's A3 thinking. When I discuss with people from Toyota, they're like, it's almost like an art form. Every problem we discuss on this A3 sheet, on that large piece of paper with different elements in here. It's not even debated anymore if we should use that. That's like the ritual we use to solve problems. And if you as a leader can install some of these rituals and everybody thinks inside that box on how to approach it, things go much, much, much faster. That's also seen with the next box, which I would call the framework box. If you set, and this is a relatively straightforward thing, if you set a certain framework on how we approach matters, you can get very fast results. Because very often think about, okay, let's discuss that problem, so to speak. Let's discuss that idea, or let's define a new strategy. And then people start to talk and they challenge. But very often we leave these meetings and it's like, okay, what have we discussed now? What was that going on? But if you have something which is called a framework box, people know exactly what is being discussed. So one of these framework boxes that I came across was Procter & Gamble's old one-page memo culture. Procter & Gamble used to have a culture where everything was discussed on a one-page piece of paper. Like you were trained in that field, and I spent quite some years in that culture being trained on this. So you were trained to get all your thinking onto one page. So everybody knew immediately, okay, so if I want to use that problem, let's write that one pager. And it had always a certain structure of the background, the problem, and so on. And everybody was immediately clear on, okay, so what do we need to do now in order to think this through? There was no debate anymore about the framework because people had accepted that framework and think inside that framework box. And immediately you could go deep into this one. You skip the discussion of what is it, how should we approach that process and that project and that problem, and go immediately into the meta. And by thinking inside that box, you can go much deeper and much faster. Another box is space boxing, how I call it. Space boxing is where you limit the time and literally the space. And I do that very often when I lead groups and lead strategy development. I limit the space, so to speak, for exploration. So sometimes we think like, okay, can you do your vision in a tweet of the old tweet, 140 characters? Can you have your one tweet about your vision and strategy direction? And once people accept that limit of the space box of 140 characters, they get creative within that 140 characters. All of a sudden it's not yes and this and this and this. You set that box, and people get going around what is available in that box. And that's very powerful. There's also very interesting social experiments, so to speak, around this on social media, where you can see things like My One Science Tweet, which is a fantastic hashtag where scientists go on and knowing that in that tweet they communicate their scientific findings. Or, for example, things like the 6-word story, which is a fantastic hashtag and project to follow, where people actually tell stories in 6 words or less. And it's amazing how much, with just the space of 6 words, you can how much you can share. My favorite one was this one was one of the key inputs into the 6-word story was the 6 words: torched the haystack, found the needle. 6 words which really change something. And it's very often what we do in the corporate context is then also say like, okay, the outcome of this meeting, can you summarize that in 6 words or less? Quick exercise. And all of a sudden you set that box and people don't discuss and so on around it. They accept that box and think inside that box and get creative with this space that is available. And that leads also to the next box, which is the resource boxing. This is like similar to space boxing, but you limit the resources. Like, let's imagine we had only 10% of the resources available. What would we do right now? There's one startup that gave themselves the resource box challenge, saying like, hey, can we build a satellite just with commercially available parts? That's like a resource box that was set forward there. And leaders can easily tap into this one. And once the box, so to speak, is accepted, people get thinking inside that box and get very deep and very creative. Speaking of creative, of course, one of the boxes that is out there and that can't be missed by thinking inside the box is the sandbox. Sandboxing, as many know, is a term used in software development to say, look, can we play with one field, one development, one program, so to speak, without it affecting the rest of the system, putting it in a sandbox. And I like to use that also as a metaphor for how to approach this, that every leader, everybody in a business field should have their own sandboxes, basically, where they try out things, try out different approaches, try out maybe some of the other boxes in a limited environment, and then see, should we do that also in the rest of the organization. So we had many various boxes that we looked at: the time box, process box, ritual box, framework box, space box, resource box, and of course the sandbox. Lots of boxes to choose from to think inside the box. So before you go out and always want to think outside the box and everything, use maybe these boxes. And as Brandon Burchard once said, like, to think higher, go deeper. And these boxes allow us to go deeper in a lot of fields. So maybe next time, don't think outside the box, think inside the box.
This has been Influencers from the Conference Board.